Welcome to the Razors Inc. podcast with your host, Jonathan Farini. We've all got that movie that we've seen 100 times, but when we say it, we mean it figuratively, that we've seen it a lot. In Jonathan's case, there is a movie that he has seen 100 times. What is it? Pour yourself a drink, pull up a chair, and hear Jonathan's take on movies, television, and today, physicians. Here's your host, Jonathan Farini.
Hey, welcome to the Razors Inc. podcast. In about 15 minutes, I want to give you my take on a couple films. One in particular, Bridge on the River Kwai, which I've recently seen for like the 100th time. And I'm going to share that take that I have with you. I'm not going to talk at length about the movie. This podcast, it's not scripted. There's no guest. There's no notes. I'm a guy that's just been watching movies ever since I was a kid and writing. And I've written about 55 stories. They're all on Substack. And I use this podcast to share my take whenever it comes up with you in the hopes that you might find it interesting or provoke thought in you. So I want to talk about physicians as protagonists, or the physician's eye as a prism to view the plot line into films used by David Lean. And the reason I'm recording this, I saw Bridge on the River Kwai recently for the 100th time. And there's a character in there, a minor character named Major Clipton, Clipton, and he's the POW camp physician. And he's the anti-hero. He's the guy with the moral compass, okay? And he's the guy that balances the stiff upper lip Alec Guinness portrayal of a British colonel or major that comes in to organize this British POW camp and balance the POW camp's commandant, Japanese character, his running of the camp. So you got these two very rigid personalities, Guinness's and Setsu Hayakawa. Both of them won Academy Awards. This film won Best Picture, Best Actor to Alec Guinness, and Best Supporting Actor to Setsu Hayakawa. And this Major Clipton guy, when I watched it recently, is really the prism in which David Lean shows the morality or the lack of morality of war. And at the end of the film, the last line is spoken by Major Clipton, and it goes like this: the madness. Now I'm going to do a fast cutaway to Apocalypse Now. There's a scene played by Marlon Brando. Colonel Kurtz is the character inside the cave, and Colonel Kurtz says, the horror. The horror. I'm just throwing it out to you that whether that was ad-libbed by Brando, thrown in at the last minute by the screenwriters, Francis maybe, and it may have been conscious, it may have been unconscious, it just happens. But I contend there's a direct correlation back to Major Clipton's final parting line in Bridge on the River Kwai. Just throw that out to you to consider. Now, let's go to another David Lean epic, 1965. Incidentally, Bridge on the River Kwai was a 1957 film. Now we're in 1965. Dr. Zhivago. It only won Best Adapted Screenplay, and it's written by a Russian author named Boris Pasternak, who was actually banned in the Soviet Union for decades and decades because of the political content. But my God, Boris Pasternak basically unfolds the birth of the Soviet Union through the eyes of, get this, a physician poet. Okay, if you're a writer and you're thinking about characters, you would be hard-pressed to come up with physician poet. Physicians are empathetic. They're science-based. We all know physicians. They're data-driven. They're scientifically driven. The good ones bring empathy to their practice. There's a lot that don't. But poets, man, they wear their hearts on their sleeve, right? And you combine a poet with a physician, you got a very strong protagonist. And, my reading about Boris Pasternak, he grew up within the aristocracy of a well-off family. I believe there was a physician in his family, and he was a poet. So it wasn't a far stretch for him to combine the two, but it's brilliant. And so was the casting of Omar Sharif, who was a favorite of David Lean. Of course, he was in Lawrence of Arabia. Interestingly enough, Zhivago was produced by Carlo Ponti, who was the husband of Sophia Loren, because he saw this. There's a character named Laura, central character in Zhivago. He saw it as a vehicle for Sophia Loren. It didn't work out. That's just some trivia for you. But when I think about the best film I've ever seen, and I've seen a lot of films, and best film, what does that really mean? It's an individual definition. It's always Dr. Zhivago for me. I think it comes back to just the amount of history that's packed into this movie of about 3 hours. Beautiful musical score and beautiful actors and actresses. And the scenery, David Lean captures scenery, right? So he takes us from the desert in Lawrence of Arabia to Moscow, and then out to the countryside in Russia, and in the cold of Siberia, and the snow and everything. It's just so epic. It just, whenever I think of the best film I've ever seen, it always comes back to Zhivago. But the point of this podcast is we have a physician, and we're seeing the morality or the lack of morality, definitely. We're seeing history and the plot line unfold through the eyes of another physician in a David Lean film. That's the take of this podcast. And I don't think it is accidental, because it has happened twice. That's why I wanted to record this, because I saw Kwai for the 100th time recently, and I started putting the puzzle together. And I wanted to share this with you when you go back and watch those two films. Another thing I wanted to talk to you about was, again, David Lean in Lawrence of Arabia. The opening shot of Lawrence is in the countryside in Britain, right? And he's riding a motorcycle haphazardly down a country road in Britain. Car pulls out in front of him, and he meets his maker. How ironic that he shall meet his maker after living the life he did as Lawrence. And I believe if you go back and study Lawrence of Arabia in light of my remarks about Kwai and about Zhivago, I think you're going to see Lawrence as this prism. Granted, he's not a physician, but you're going to see history unfold. You're going to see the morality, the immorality of war. You're going to see competing interests within war and politics through the eyes of Lawrence. That's kind of an obvious one, but I think that it is a very interesting plot twist that Lean would begin the film with this epic character who survived this tumult in his life, lived this outrageous life that most of us can only dream of, and that he shall meet his maker on a quiet, poetic road in the English countryside. It's an ironic twist Lean is throwing at us, okay? So anyways, there's two films, Physician as protagonist, Physician as moral compass, Physician as a recorder of history. And I throw it out to you that when you go back and you watch those films, that maybe you'll remember this podcast and you'll see them a bit differently. And if you want to go back after watching Kwai and Major Clipton's remarks at the end, and Marlon Brando's The Horror, see if you agree with me. Thank you for listening. Go check these films out again if you haven't seen them in a while. They're really a treat, and David Lean was really a gift to us all. What a career. Wherever you go, leave a soft footprint behind, and be good to yourself. Class is dismissed.
You've been listening to the Razors Inc. podcast with Jonathan Farini. So what movie have you seen 100 times? Drop an email to razorsincpodcast@gmail.com. And be sure to check out Jonathan's collection of published fiction at the Jonathan Farini Story Collection on Substack or at jonathanfarini.com.